So hello, everyone. Welcome to our 35th webinar. It's crazy to think we're already at 35. Our first presenter here is Christopher Raymond, and he will be talking about this new project that he's leading called Transformative Cities. Christopher also leads the Viva Plan project and Enable as well. So Christopher, whenever you're ready, you can take over.
Thanks, Tessa, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm probably going to have to do some little technical changes here. And okay, can you see my full screen now?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about this new project and also a network called Transformative Cities. It's all about how do we integrate active and passive sensing systems to enable nature-based solutions, smooth mobility, and sustainable lifestyles in cities. First of all, I'm going to talk a bit about who, what, and where of the network. So we are an Academy of Finland Research Council funded project in partnership with the European Union, particularly the Next Generation EU instrument, where they increasingly fund or co-fund with the member states on different priority initiatives. And this one's linked to the smart green transition or the post-pandemic recovery funding. Our network has grew out of Finland. For those who don't know where Finland is, it's shown on the left slide here. And we're also working in some cities in Finland, including Helsinki, in the capital of Finland, Espoo, which is the city adjoining Helsinki, Lahti, just to the north of Helsinki, and way north is the city of Oulu. In our network, we have a range of research partners, including Turku University, the University of Oulu, myself from University of Helsinki, Urban Systems Lab, Aalto University, ETH Zurich, University of Eastern Finland. And in addition, we have multiple companies and cities involved in what we call our competence cluster, including the City of Helsinki, City of Espoo, City of Lahti, City of Oulu, ITS Finland, which represents a network of all intelligent transport systems of Finland, Kone, which is one of the largest companies in Finland. You've probably seen the Kone elevators in your travels. HSY, which is the transport network company supporting the city of Helsinki. Telia company, which is one of the mobile phone companies. MapSchnere, which develops the participatory mapping tools. Citra, which is a knowledge broker or think tank. Sova 3D animation company, and YIT, which is one of the biggest property development firms in Finland. Here's our research team, comprising of a number of our members, also our research advisors. In terms of how we engage with practitioners and cities, we have what we call the competence cluster, which we meet with every approximately 6 months. And with the competence cluster, we try to engage in key issues and key challenges that they have. For example, we had a competence cluster meeting earlier this year where we brought all 3 cities together. And one of the big topics was this new EU nature restoration law and how this nature restoration law would affect their city planning. And interesting, there was a lot of lively debates regarding the conflicting priorities between densification and nature-based solutions that emerged during these discussions. But also the role of this competence cluster is such that we're wanting to create solutions that can support their planning. So they'll have an important review role in any draft prototypes and methods that we create. And separate to these major meetings, often work packages meet with smaller groups within the competence cluster on a weekly to fortnightly basis. In terms of our missions and goals, we are driven by the recognition that there is a massive urban acceleration in terms of population, GDP, as well as material use such as water, crude steel, energy, cement, and that's having major ecological crises such as biosphere degradation, multiple other indicators of biodiversity loss. We also see it correlates with increases in surface temperature and increases in carbon dioxide. So the question is, how do we turn this all around? And one thing we argue is that we need to think about how to build connections between social, ecological, technological systems in new ways. And those connective tissues include how do we rethink growth in cities? How do we think the concept of efficiency? How do we think the way that the state organises, particularly between cities and federal ministries? How do we rethink the commons, which is the use of public space? And how do we think issues of justice, such as who's entitled to the benefits of nature-based solutions, etc.? And we like to think of ourselves as a cross-sectoral project. So we're working across different challenges, including biodiversity conservation and restoration, smooth mobility and sustainable lifestyles, the combination of adaptation and mitigation measures, as well as looking at policy and legal trade-offs to rapid change towards transformation. And additionally, we often draw upon a technological lens. So we're thinking about issues such as smart citizenship, such as how do we gamify citizen experiences? How do we develop new platforms of public participation, including PPGIS or Public Participation GIS? How do we create spaces for collective learning and adaptation? And how do we develop and draw upon existing and new mobile technologies to help assess behaviour over time, as well as lifestyle preferences? And then the bigger question is, how do we harness these technologies to promote transformations towards more sustainable, resilient and inclusive urban communities by 2030? So this is all brought together in this overarching goal, which is to create an integrated set of what we're calling passive and active sensing and transformative governance methods to inform rapid changes to carbon neutral and climate resilient futures by 2030. And by passive sensing, we mean we draw upon data which is collected about us, whether we like it or not, such as data collected through social media, telecommunications and mobility apps, which collect behavioural patterns, mobility or use of public spaces, produced indirectly and continuously by citizens. And active sensing is where we collect place-based data on the behavioural patterns of citizens in everyday living environments. And this is actively assessed, meaning we have consent processes in place so that people know that they are having information collected about them. And just some examples that we came into this work with is Journey Planners is a great example of a passive sensing tool, which are used to take into account the travel environment and how do we change travel routes to help avoid harmful exposures, but also increasing health benefiting encounters with the environment. We've also done a lot of work around participatory mapping. So how do we engage local communities in identifying the values that are important to them, also their development preferences, such as the map in red here, or indeed important green areas as highlighted in this map in teal green or teal blue. And another thing that I'm sure you're familiar with through Timon's work is how do we draw upon serious gaming and other gaming platforms to better understand the trade-offs to transformation. And we're drawing upon this lens of the three spheres of transformation, which recognises that changes need to occur practically in terms of behavioural and technical responses, politically in terms of the policies and the political drivers of society, and the personal, which is the beliefs, values, worldviews and paradigms that individuals and groups have. And when we think about how these sensing systems come together, we're very much interested in how do we predict or diagnose, elicit, explain and predict new forms of transformation in ways that combine active and passive sensing systems and in ways that connect with the political, practical, and personal sphere. Or a more practical way of showing it is bringing these sensing systems together to support carbon neutral and climate resilient futures. There's a lot in this slide. I think this says the same thing, but just to say that we're also very interested in looking at the cross-cutting dimensions between sustainable mobility, biodiversity conservation, carbon neutrality, and human well-being in cities. And just to give you an example of some of the things that we're currently up to, so we're in the process of developing some new prototypes to scan mobility patterns and environment exposures. We're starting off in the city of Oulu, which is in the north of Finland. And what we're using, or what we're doing, is drawing upon mobile phone data, in this case, Telia data, to try to parse out the different mobility behavioural patterns of citizens, particularly trying to distinguish between biking behaviour, public transport behaviour like bus use, and car behaviour, and to identify patterns in those behaviours with the goal of trying to prioritise new forms of infrastructure, not only hard infrastructure like roads or cycling corridors, but also green infrastructure and nature-based solutions along those corridors. We call this multimodal urban accessibility. There's a lot of interesting work that the University of Oulu is doing in this project, particularly trying to analyse how these data can be used to, for example, facilitate fast bike lanes and also facilitate new forms of public transportation system in Oulu. But we're taking this work further by trying to bring in elements of nature-based solutions so that we're not only focusing on the fastest routes or the most efficient routes, but also healthy environmental exposures. We're also thinking about this in the context of how do we design new mobility hubs which are there for recharging of electric vehicles, but also for, can be train or bus stations, e-scooter hubs, etc. Recognising that nature-based solutions have a central role in these areas, so too does issues of smooth mobility and sustainable lifestyles. In relation to work package 2, we're trying to use active sensing systems to scan sustainable urban lifestyles. We are currently administering a number of participatory mapping surveys using online platform Maps&Air to spatially assess lifestyle profiles. So these are profiles of people who have different behavioural patterns, whether those who dominantly use bike to travel to work or versus those who walk or take public transport or drive their car. But we're also interested in examining how biophysical characteristics of the individual everyday urban environment, such as tree cover density, active mobility networks, promote these different lifestyles in order to identify priority areas for promoting sustainable mobility in the landscape. And in work package 3, we're looking at new forms of active urban interventions to transform lifestyles. So lifestyles which, for example, are car dependent to more active lifestyles which are less car dependent. And we are doing some pre-test, post-test research in conjunction with this new light rail line, which is essentially being almost about to be with the traction in place, but the rail line's about to start, and it's connecting the campuses of Otaniemi, which is where Aalto University is based, all the way to the eastern side, which is the Viki campus of the University of Helsinki, with multiple light rail stops in between. So we're currently surveying residents in these areas to identify their current behaviours, travel behaviours, as well as nature-based solutions preferences. And then we're going to follow up 6 months after the rail line starts working, and then 12 months after. So it's going to be a longitudinal analysis. And we're very much interested in not only mobility changes, but also different ways that people access nature-based solutions along these routes, recognising that these mobility infrastructure can be driving forces for other changes in lifestyles. Just to follow up on that, the interventions are related to the promotion of active mobility, and we'll monitor interventions as natural experiments in these settings. And it will involve baseline data collection, interventions, walking or cycling infrastructural maintenance, as well as the rail line, and follow-up data collection. This example, Yokeri, is one of them. We're going to repeat these interventions in other cities, including Alati. And how are we doing that? We're not only using participatory mapping, we're using this new technique called geographic explicit momentary assessments, where we're trying to assess place-based changes in people's behavioural patterns during the day, across the week, and across the month and year, by having regular surveys sent out to people. So this initial work in the Yokeri is very much focused on participatory mapping, but in the Alati case, we're hoping to pilot these new GEMMA methods. The advantage of this is that we get more case-specific and place-based information, as well as temporal information on what are people's behavioural patterns in the landscape, and how do they vary as a function of season, but also as a function of traffic and other contextual factors. We'll also be drawing upon videos as a way to understand behaviour. This gives a figure of how GEMMA can be thought about in more detail, combining environmental factors such as parks, services, noise, with situational factors such as human proximity, weather, transport mode, activities, with perceived factors such as perceived stress, or indeed physiologically determined distress, and assessment of what we call the everyday environment, such as daily mobility, activities, social contacts, using GPS and other tools. In work package 4, we're very much interested in these ideas of transformative governance, particularly the role of law in transforming to carbon neutral and climate resilient futures. And we have legal experts looking at what are some of the legal barriers, but also enablers of change in these different city landscapes, drawing upon legal doctrinal analysis, literature reviews, comparative law analysis, interviews and Delphi panels. And what we're already finding is that there's a lack of coordination between land use planning and traffic planning in Helsinki, as well as other cities in Finland. But tensions are not primarily legal. They are often institutional, such as cultural. For example, ministries not wanting to work with each other due to historical factors, or indeed individuals within ministries not wanting to partner with each other. There's also unclarity on the requirements of plan impact assessments, in that while their impact assessments are needed, there's not actually a clear understanding of what needs to go into many of these impact assessments based upon the law. We're also interested, as I mentioned earlier, in the role of this new nature restoration law of the European Commission. As mentioned, it has undergone a change through a lot of lobbying. It's no longer related to protection of all urban areas in cities in terms of biodiversity. So we've moved from a no net loss of all areas of cities and 5% gain in biodiversity of all areas in cities by 2050 to a certain share of urban areas with certain qualities. And so this, in fact, represents a major decline in ambition around urban biodiversity conservation across Europe. But we're still interested in how cities are going to implement this law in the context of all these other pressures, such as urban mobility needs, development needs, etc. And in Work Package 5, we're trying to bring these complex trade-offs together using serious gaming. And more specifically, we're trying to bring together active and passive sensing data with gamification infrastructures to assess trade-offs to sustainable urban lifestyles and to improve with the goal of improving the usability and policy relevance of gamification solutions and to unlock trade-offs to sustainable urban transformations. We're currently working with the cities and drawing upon the survey data to co-create the decision rules for the serious game. So rules regarding what types of nature-based solutions are needed, rules relating to urban mobility, rules relating to urban development, quality and magnitude, etc. And all these decision rules will be embedded in a game that will hopefully be both paper-based, but also an online game that can be used virtually. In terms of events, we have a range of different events proposed. Here's our, summary of our Gantt chart. As you can see, the NATURA event today is pretty well on time. We also have a range of other network webinars, which we're going to have across the 3 years. We have got PhD courses and master's students courses around this concept of integrating active and passive sensing. One course which is open to the world, which I'll mention to you in a minute. We've got network-oriented events such as this CITRA event, which is happening next year. And we've got an intelligent transport system event in 2025. But probably an invitation to all of you is to think about this final Transformative Cities Summit, where we want to bring together not only our prototypes, but other prototypes that seek to connect nature-based solutions, urban mobility, as well as urban development in new ways. And that will be held in Helsinki towards the latter part of the project, i.e. months 34 to 36. In relation to this course I just mentioned, it's not moving, there we go. Next year we're going to be holding an in-person course in accelerated format at the University of Oulu. It's going to take place between the 27th of February and 1st of March. And this is very much built around learning how to use passive and active sensing data to explain and predict sustainable mobility and sustainable lifestyles. It's pitched towards PhDs and postdoc students, so those who have moderate to advanced skills in geospatial analyses, but we're also open to master students who are quite experienced already and have higher level skills. We're going to have a maximum of 20 participants due to limitations with the computer labs. But if you are interested in attending or know someone who's interested in attending, please do let me know. And you can contact me at these email address. So that's all what I had to share today. I'm happy to open it up to any questions you may have. Thank you. Over to you, Tessa.
Yeah, we have just about 4 minutes for questions. So if you have one, just go ahead and speak up, or you can raise your hand. Alternatively, you can also put it in the chat as well, and I can read it for you.
Yep.
We have a question from Rembrandt. You can speak up, Rembrandt.
That was amazing. Thank you, Christopher. Also amazing how you can bring over all that information in a very short time. What I'm interested in, and I have billions of questions, but this one comes first. Can you say a little bit about how it's received? You said that you do research in the different departments, or that some ministry or some department is maybe adverse to somebody else. So there are some tensions there. Can you say a bit more how what your customers, so to speak, would expect, or how you can deliver to your customers, which I think primarily are the city planners?
Yeah, very good question. So you're very true in that the city of Helsinki in particular is not one united identity. They project a united identity, but there is tensions between different city departments or sectors. There's also tensions between the city of Helsinki and the ministries. And this, in fact, played out a few years ago where the Transport Department took the city of Helsinki to court for their green boulevards, saying that they were going to conflict with the smooth mobility mandate that the central administration had, meaning the under the Transport Act. And so, some of those conflicts still exist today, about 6 years after the litigation, where individuals between these departments don't want to talk to each other. Now, that isn't an administrative conflict. It's not a strict, it stemmed from a legal conflict, but it's an ongoing administrative conflict. And we're using these serious games to sort of gamify, but also to take some of the heat out of the discussion. And what we're finding is that we can start to engage with these different sectors through gamification in ways that we could not do when we're having to deal with real life issues in a cutthroat policy environment. So we can explore trade-offs cross-sectorally and think about new ways of narrating those trade-offs and working through those trade-offs across sectors. So that's one example of that, Rembrandt. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So it's been well received, but it all comes down to trust, and we have really strong trust relationships being built where we're meeting with these different sectors, often on a weekly basis, sometimes only for half an hour via Zoom, to follow up on issues, to work through them. And there's a lot of willingness in the city as well as in the ministry to do that, which might be a bit different to my experiences, e.g. in Australia or in other parts of the world where there may be less trust between researchers and policymakers. So that's another key learning here.
Thank you.
And we have another question from Pallavi.
Hi, thank you. This was a great presentation. I was wondering, you mentioned that there has been some dilution of language around urban sustainability. And I was wondering, one, what the cause of that might be, and two, the possibility that, you know, the language was diluted to give more maybe leeway to different cities to kind of interpret things in ways, because I feel like I've heard of more and more programs around urban you know, greening, green infrastructure and etc. And I was wondering, you know, it's an interesting issue that sort of goes against the trend of what we're seeing, but maybe I don't know enough about.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And in fact, my master's student is investigating this at the moment. What actually happens in Finland is that city networks developed, so alliances between, for example, City of Espoo, City of Helsinki, City of Oulu, to essentially fight against the new nature restoration law of the European Commission. They saw it as a threat to their densification plans. If you're having to, for example, increase 5% of urban green space in a place like City of Helsinki, which is already 40% green, that's a large area. And so these cities banded together and came up with alternative proposals, which essentially weakened the law. And then they banded together with other city networks across other member states in the European Union. And they pushed this dilution of the legislation through a series of amendments. And we are following up on that now of how these city alliances formed, what were their main motivations. But it really comes down to this law challenging their economic growth mandates and essentially their investment mandates, which they hold dear politically. And this is a great example where sadly, economic priorities conflict with biodiversity conservation priorities.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
And Buwan, would you be able to put your question in the chat so that Chris can respond to it there? We just need to move on to our next presenters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Alrighty, so we can move on to Rembrandt and Gijs. I hope I said that right. They will be giving a short interactive talk on the challenge to achieve governance by scaling up rewilding at sea. So you can go ahead and share your screen.
Thanks, Tessa. I don't know if you received my sheet, otherwise I do without and just talk.
Yes, I did actually.
And probably not going to use all of them, but they will be helpful to also read what we're talking about. So first, an introduction. Gijs van Zonneveld, he's an ecologist with a long-standing experience in the nature movement and not-for-profit nature organizations. And he's also an associate with ARC, NATURA. ARC is one of the key players in the Netherlands for conservation, but in a new way. So they will pursue what they call rewilding, which basically means that you relate to nature in a different way, stating that nature in a way doesn't have to be pampered, but if you create the right conditions, nature can sort of, let's say, help itself. I am Rembrandt Zeigers. I have worked with ARC and also with Gijs. I'm an independent developer, change agent researcher. And I did research on relating to nature by interviewing people who work practices of working with humans and nature. For instance, herders on the Alps who go out with cows and sheep and then are by themselves dealing with the animals in quite specific conditions. I come back to that a bit later. So first, to give you an idea of the practice, what we did together, Gijs and myself and others, in the context of ARC, Rewilding, is building a wind part of the Rewilding at Sea program. And this specifically meant that we were approached by big wind farm at sea building conglomerates who were looking to take advantage of a new tender, a new criteria of a tender, which is in the vicinity of the Netherlands, just in the coastal area, where for the first time Dutch government stated ecological criteria, and these wind farm builders were not sure about it, so they were looking for help, and that was also reaching out to ARC and their experience with ecology at sea. So what does it mean, ecology at sea? And Gijs can say much more about it. What is already known, so yeah, that's fine, thank you, can leave it still in the introduction and then I'll speed up. So what is nature work at sea by ARC? At the moment, that is very much understanding how rewilding at sea in principle works. It means that you have to look at particular spaces where there is still some remaining structure at the sea bottom or at the sea. You could need to look at all the non-ecological factors, the non-living factors like the streams and the winds and the sand movements, but also what's still remaining in terms of ecosystems or in terms of organic processes, and of course also the animals. So it is a consensus that you need to focus on particular species and also on building first place-related structures. So shellfish reefs and the restoration of shellfish reefs is very important. It's a focus area of doing rewilding at sea. And ARC has a lot of experience already with that. And it also has licenses acquired from the government to do that kind of work in a couple of places. Now, what is at stake at the moment is what we call seascapes, which means scaling up the pilot areas, because the pilot areas could be like maybe 100 square meters with quite a density of shellfish, and already there's evidence that in doing this in certain way, you can the shellfish will survive, because that was first thing you needed to figure out. So now we know that shellfish can survive in particular ways of doing it, but now the idea is, how can you build a real seascape, or how can you do really rewilding, which means building the conditions for larger scale restoration of ecosystem at sea. This is where we are at the moment with ARC. I want to talk about the main topic now, the governance. If you look at the governance, how it's working, and I already gave an example, then of course it's the government itself, and that sort of owns the sea area in front of the Netherlands. So you have policies set, and you have the institutions who look after those policies. You have quite a few science bodies, universities and institutes doing research and advising. You have, of course, the judiciary to do the application of the law. And then you, of course, have the companies, NGOs that could lobby. Now, all this together has created the adjustment of these criteria for the first time with the wind farms to include ecological criteria. If we look at the current state of the sea, that's the next slide. We can see that in this governance, there are assumptions stated, or there are assumptions working into this way of how governance works that go back to history of how we see nature. And I would like to give one or two examples here.
Sorry, which slide? Sorry, this is chaotic.
Assumptions. Sorry, the next one. Yeah, that one. So in general, we feel that there is a set of assumptions that works against rewilding. And these are some of them. So nature is not affected by people's conduct and actions, or human society functions independent of nature. Nature is there for the benefit of humans. Please, yeah. People affected or suffering damage will benefit in other ways from economic progress, or damage and destruction to nature can be mitigated. As we speak, the whole fishery sector is reorganized, and we can say that the large companies, the large fishing companies, have opportunities to bring their business somewhere else, but the more traditional ones are slowly disappearing. Now, without arguing if that's an evidence of these assumptions, but we from experience see that that there's a relation. If you go to the next slide, and we see some developments coming back from the previous presentation. We now have the European law that was shown to you in the previous presentation. We have a UN declaration which states that 30% of the sea needs to be protected areas. We have a slight improvement of protection of NATURA 2000. NATURA 2000 is the European regulation for conservation of nature areas also at sea. So for instance, the Doggerbank is a large area in the North Sea, and the UK is now protecting its part of the Doggerbank. But in the Netherlands, although it's a NATURA 2000 area, which means it's legally appointed as a nature conservation area, it's only marginally protected. It's well known that Dutch fisheries are still active on the Doggerbank. We can see that the Dutch researchers fairly recently acknowledged that it's too much fragmented and it's not looking at the system as a whole. So several reports. The one I'm mentioning here is one in 2015. You see that, for instance, in monitoring, all Dutch university institutes and research institutes do monitoring. They all use different methods, which means that the monitoring outcome cannot be compared. We see attempts to give rights to nature, which is a very interesting development over the last 10, 15 years, maybe, also in the Netherlands. So we see people working to give a right as a person to the Waddenzee or to the river Maas. And we see attempts to work with true ecocentric positions. Like we have an organization in the Netherlands that states it gives a voice to the North Sea. So it organizes meetings where it lets the rays or the sharks speak to the public. Very interesting and very creative. Not going into that much further, but you get an idea. So then next slide. We state that in general we see regeneration. This is ARC mission, the work of ARC, is severely hampered by existing governance model and these assumptions that I mentioned. And we see that there is elements of transition of governance needed, both tangible, instrumental, and intangible, which you could say moral. And we say that there's a change strategy needed to cover both. So first, that is important to introduce these two terms, the ecocentric ethic and the anthropocentric ethic. So we need an anthropocentric ethic, which means that humans are not only focusing on themselves, to say it very simple, but to focus on that people are dependent and that humans need to think inclusive of nature. Of course, we see many examples of that also stated in the previous presentation when we were presented nature solutions. But even if you look at an ecocentric ethic, we say that can be instrumental. That means we save nature for the sake of humans, which is fine, but it's still in a way veering to the anthropocentric instead of the ecocentric, versus a moral position, which in a way you could say is acknowledging that you save nature for its intrinsic value. And that is one of the new developments that I was referring to, talking about the rights of nature. That's really based on the idea that nature has intrinsic value and that it needs to be acknowledged and worked with through building a different relation to non-human others, to nature. So even when you have an ecocentric ethic, you can still have like two different positions within that. And we state that it's interesting or needed to work from this idea of the intrinsic value of non-human animals and nature. So I'm almost at the end. If you go to sheet 7, the next one, here you see that a bit more explained. This is based on research where these people were interviewed. Like I said, for instance, the herders on the Alps. If you look into lived experience of these people and this particular way of doing research, particular way of interviewing, you can find at least 6 distinctive ways of relating to nature. So the first one is what you could call the body subject level. It's a bodily knowing of nature. It's an organic, visceral dynamic. It's communication using one's animalistic capacity. So using your hearing, your nose, your eyes. Nature communicates, but not through human language, but it does communicate all the time. So if you use your body, you can process and you can start understanding that kind of communication. Then there's a level of a call of nature. You could say that's kind of an entrepreneurial level where people like explorers go into nature. But at the same time, they need to connect to culture. So for instance, one of those herders in the Alps, after having been there for 3 months by themselves, going back for the winter to town, is then telling that they have to sort of close down themselves in order to be in the city again, because the amount of information is completely overload. And if you do not shut down what you've built up to use at the mountain, you go crazy. This also implies that people for a longer time in nature speak of a call. So many of them even like to be better by themselves in nature than being in a town. And then there's a cooperative level. That's also maybe from that kind of research where you see that, for instance, the dogs that are being used in the herding, you need to understand them, according to the people that do it, as individuals. So you start to cooperate with the non-human in order to do the job of herding. Then you have the differentiating level and the management level and the ownership level. Those are more common. The differentiating level is probably how biology over the last 200 years have made guides of all kinds of different plants, all kinds of different species, understanding that one species is different from the other, it's been described. And so you have a sort of an access of how much different life there is. The management level is where human culture is dominant and understood to be forceful, but activities are mostly directed by technology and science, seeing nature as complex, but as needing to be controlled, instead of knowing nature through this lived experience. And then the ownership level is, well, it's sort of like, hey, you can buy nature, you can buy it for whatever kind of purpose. Now coming to what is, Gijs is telling me we're running out of time. That's what we're doing. Just one example that we also worked with, that's the next sheet, number 8. Can you move that? Sorry, number 9. Apologies. This is an example of Lyme Regis, which is an area in the UK where the fishing community was becoming desperate several years back. Debates with authorities and frustration upon frustration. It's an example of obligation to rules and regulations. So the community was very much regulated by the authorities. You can't do this, you need to do that, And then they decided to really take matters into their own hands because they were also suffering. The stock was depleting, their income was depleting. And so Lyme Regis is an example of the application of taking responsibility yourself in a way, not listening so much maybe to the authorities or to the regulations. And in this example, it was spectacular how the sea also benefited. Within years, there were more stock, and the coastal reefs were flourishing again, etc., etc. So what we are stating and what we are bringing today and want to put in front of you is that we state that in our experience, and sorry for maybe having been slightly abstract, I find that always more easier than giving the practical examples. But what this all comes to is that we want to point at that we need an inner reform. We need an inner reform in order to change governance. The inner reform, as I hope I illustrated, and that we can talk about in more concrete examples. But this was our journey in doing this work for ARC. The inner reform is to start seeing your relation to the sea almost like as a personal relation, and starting to practice seeing the non-human others and the sea as an actor with intrinsic value. That's what we like to shortly discuss with you as well, that we put the emphasis of the inner reform when it comes to governance and governance transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rembrandt. And we have about 6 minutes for questions. So again, just speak up or raise your hand or put it in the chat if you have one.
One question that I have is there any recognition or any and maybe none of you works at sea, but maybe you work at different areas, and maybe you can think of situations or examples that resonate with this story.
Well, I think there's a lot of interest recently in, at least in North America, in listening to the voices of Indigenous people that had traditional ways of managing their land, to using, for example, using fire to sort of clear areas, and other kinds of land management techniques that have gone by the wayside because because of course the colonist way was always the way to go. So there's more interest in that, I would say. So that sort of resonates as well.
The problem is that the economic value of sea in general, and the North Sea specifically, is so huge that it's very difficult to relate to old ways of dealing with the ecosystem and the sustainability that is necessary to create biodiversity and a intrinsically sustainable ecosystem. The economic value makes it profitable to loot the sea and not care for its occupants. So there is I'm trying to find the word. I'm learning French, so it's very difficult to switch to English at the moment. The relationship between humans and ecosystems in general, and more specifically the North Sea, is tremendous, and therefore we have all kinds of problems restoring that relationship between humans and ecosystem. So it would be very interesting to see if you have examples of how we can strengthen the relationship between humans and as users of ecosystems and the ecosystem functioning itself.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Gijs, is the idea that profit is really driving everything. And I think that until we get out of that mode of living on Earth, it's going to be a challenge always. And so where things are successful in kind of allowing traditional ways of managing lands and waters are successful is often when there's not a conflict regarding the potential profit of some multinational company or something in being able to, access that resource. And, I mean, I'm always wondering where was it that we just decided that it was completely okay for, these entities to just do whatever they wanted to land or
under ecosystems in general. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we're recognizing that there, and maybe part of the issue is to recognize the dependence that we have, not just, the people that are locally based on these kinds of fisheries or land properties, but also the entire population is dependent upon this healthy maintenance of those ecosystems.
Well, I think the emphasis for us is also how to offer or how to organize an experience, so how to actively diminish the gap between people doing governance as their job and relating to the sea or understanding the sea. So we did several expeditions, and you can't have the whole municipality of the Amsterdam or whatever on board one ship, but just introducing and helping a lived experience, although it's a very small step, makes a difference. I guess similar to developing a serious game, helping to build trust between parties or having a conversation on the table. So we feel that in the work of restoring and making seascapes, these kind of direct relations, also in terms of who's actually doing the governance, is very important. Hence this example of Lime Bay, where people themselves become the governors instead of somebody else.
Just one question about that, if I may. I wonder to what extent you tried or had any success in involving, business or enterprise or industry or whatever you want to call it in those discussions, to have them at the table with communities, with others. I mean, I just wonder because in our experience, we work with, decision makers, we work with communities, we work with NGOs, we work with, community organizations, but we have never had very much success in getting any businesses to sort of come to the table. I just wonder if that's something you tried.
We can briefly answer, and I think we're now at the time boundary. Otherwise, we can take offline. What Gijs and myself actually achieved was a big cooperation, a big partnership with one of those wind farm builders. And but funnily enough, an organization as ARC, 35 people, and this wind farm, 10,000 people, basically hit the same problems. So even this large company recognized completely, some of the, so even this big partner, it had as its mission to make sure that the whole sector of the wind farm would follow them. They wanted to be the leaders in terms of nature inclusive and helping the North Sea to restore. But they had similar difficulty in talking within their own sector as we had with some of the governors. But we have been successful in building that partnership. It still exists, and it's very helpful, of course, because they have the funds. But we can say more if you like how exactly we did that.
We probably need to get going, huh, Tessa?
Yeah, we are at a little over time. So I think we should wrap up here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Rembrandt and Gijs and Christopher, for wonderful presentations. Sorry about that. Wonderful presentations. Yeah, I can go ahead and share your contact information if anyone has follow-up questions, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
And thanks everyone for bearing with me with the presentation and difficulties.
Thank you all.
Have a great
Thanks. Thanks.
Thanks, folks.
Bye then.